Welcome everyone to the Center for Closing the Health Gaps Town Hall meeting. I'm Cincinnati Vice Mayor Jan-Michele Lemon Kearney, and I will be your moderator along with the phenomenal Ebony J from 100.3 Cincy R&B. Tonight, we're going to talk about youth and mental health, a great topic. We have a lot of questions. We're going to give you a lot of answers, and we have an outstanding panel. So let me remind you that we are taping this session. So, we'll repost it later for those who can't be here at the moment. So turn it over to Ebony J.
For those of you that are listening to the live taping, you'll have a chance to get your questions answered. So if you are on Zoom or on Facebook, you can definitely go right ahead and put some questions that you have now about mental health. So that way we can go ahead and prepare our panelists to be able to start. Now, I want to go ahead and kick things off and let us be able to start by introducing each other. So we're going to kick it off with Dr. Janeece Warfield. How are you doing today, Queen? Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing now?
Sure. Well, again, thank you for this opportunity. My name, again, is Dr. Janeece Warfield. I am a clinical professor at the School of Professional Psychology at Wright State University, as well as I am also a clinical psychologist. I am trained in pediatric psychology, but my work now is more community-based. Currently, I'm the director of a program called Moms to Be, which is a psychoeducational program for pregnant moms. So we want to make sure that those mothers deliver healthy babies and those babies continue to thrive till their first birthday at least. So we're preventing infant mortality.
Thank you, Dr. Warfield. Okay, now we have Miss Artesia Dunbar. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what you're doing?
Absolutely, yes. I am in my last year of clinical training at the School of Professional Psychology at Wright State University. I've been under the great mentorship and professorship of Dr. Warfield and all the other wonderful faculty and staff there. I also have some background in school psychology. I went to school for that in Atlanta, Georgia, and worked for a while before deciding that I need more skills because the kids are coming in with concerns that, need more work, need more assistance. And so I've been really grateful to have gained the skills that I have over the years and still have the opportunity to work with this very important population.
We love to have you, and I hear the passion in your voice. So this is going to be a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining us.
Of course. Thank you for having us.
And then Miss Ariyah Robinson. Did I say it wrong?
Yes, it's okay. It's Ariyah.
Ariyah. There we go, Miss Robinson. Tell us
Yeah.
about yourself and your background.
Yes, so I am a second year student at the School of Professional Psychology as well, at Wright State University. I currently am a child emphasis, and I am working as well under Dr. Warfield and all the other great faculty at Wright State University. Before I came to school, I worked in an inpatient psychiatric unit with children under the age of 12 primarily, and some teenagers sprinkled in as well. But during this time, I'm enjoying just learning more as we go along and enjoying my practicum placement where I'm working with kids who primarily have ADHD or other mental health concerns as well going on. But I am grateful to be here. Thank you.
That's great. I love seeing all these Black women in this field, this mental health field. So important for people to have people who look like themselves to actually relate to and talk to. I mean, that's wonderful. I see Lacey Roberts, a media star, is here with us. She might be helping behind the scenes, but Lacey, if you're coming on, just, jump on in. All right. So I think she's helping back there to get everything running. So
hi, everyone.
Hey.
How
Hi.
are you? Yeah, this is a
Good.
really great, important topic. So I'm glad that we're here to discuss this tonight.
Yeah, and I want to thank you and also John Reichel and the whole tech team back there making all this happen. So, okay.
We appreciate you all. Now, for everybody that's on Zoom and those that's on Facebook, if you have any questions, any comments, any things that you would like to share, please feel free to put them below. And we would love it if you can put your name, but understand we do have it where you can put it in here anonymously. Okay, so all questions we'll try to get them answered tonight.
All right. So here's some questions that came in advance. So let me just start. Anyone can answer this. So the National Institute of Mental Health has reported a significant increase in anxiety and depression among teenagers, and this is in the last 10 years.
Yes.
So what factors are contributing to this rise?
I can start if you want. I think there are a lot of factors that contribute to this rise right now. I know for a fact COVID definitely played a great significant rise in the extent that kids were home, they were out of their regular norm. I think when we think about just ways that youth communicate with one another now, a lot of that is through social media. And so again, they're not having that face-to-face interaction. Um, a lot of times things can get blown out of proportion in reference to when we're reading text because there's no emotion per se behind the texts we would have with just verbal communication. And then I think the ways that youth now, they take more of a reactive stance to things versus a proactive stance. And as a result of that, that also can contribute then to feeling more anxious, feeling more depressed, because they're not having those maybe conversations that they would typically have before kind of social media kind of took into the world that we have right now. And I don't know if my other colleagues want to add with that, but that's what I would say to start off with.
Yeah, and I was going to say, so you're saying it's almost like their environments are different. You know, are parents different? Are we not doing what we're supposed to do? Or the school's different? What's happening that we're not having those interactions and we're not dealing with conflict resolution? We're not listening to each other. I mean, all of that. What's going on with that?
One of the things that I think about is the access to information, and not all of that information is great information. I think about when I grew up, I was slightly shielded by the idea that if someone was saying something about me, I probably didn't hear about it until I got to school the next day, if I heard about it at all. And nowadays with social media, everything is so instant. And so as a result, one of the things that we as a community will need to do is be more, like Dr. Warfield said, proactive about teaching these kind of skills around how to ignore those things or how to work through those conflicts or how to process how you're feeling about that interaction or that encounter. And it's happening at such a fast pace that sometimes parents aren't even aware that their children are having these experiences yet. Because it's happening at much younger ages. I mean, I think people associate access to social media with things like being having access to a cell phone, but with multiplayer games online, that information is still out there. People are still having those same cyberbullying like experiences. In addition to that, I feel like our kids are a little bit more aware. There is a lot of information out there right now about how often or how many youth are nervous about things like climate change, because again, that information is out there at their fingertips, and they can look into it and they can see the real trajectory. They can see what the data says about these things that they could and should be worried about. And then another thing is their own personal exposures when they're looking at what's happening in the neighborhoods, what might be happening in their households, what's happening on TV. There's constant exposure to different traumatic situations that can be impacting, again, how they process those situations. And if we're not teaching the skills early on how to process those things, then students and children are going through life trying to figure it out on their own. And sometimes the skills that they come up with are not as effective as we would want them to be.
I think like back in the day when we were younger, our parents would say like, stay in the child's place, or this is a grown folks conversation, or you don't need to worry about that right now. Well, with the media being out now, the kids are worried about everything. And literally whatever they think about or want to know, they can go on Google and like find this information. So I think that those are the true factors of the rise, because during COVID, we wasn't talking or communicating. So we had time to be at home. We had time to spend time alone. And now we done found out too much information. They don't know what to do with this information. And part of it, the parents may not even recognize the signs for the youth. Before we kind of get into the signs of how our parents can like recognize what that look like, was there anything that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I did. I think that that was a great point that you brought up about kids just being able to find the information. I think that it starts really from a young age because think about the fact that children are growing up with tablets in hand. You know, that's very different. I did not have a tablet as a kid. And so I think that when we're looking at what kids can see, they're Googling the answers to their questions that they have. They're not going to their parents to ask these questions. So I think it's important that parents are able to monitor these things and create a space that kids can ask these questions kind of in a no judgment zone and just get an honest answer and explore their feelings about things that are going on. But when we have situations where parents are not able to have these conversations or aren't seeing what's going on in their kids' world on YouTube or on Google and what they're looking for, we kind of get stuck in these situations where kids are exploring this on their own.
And you know, the
I
thing
could,
about that, Ariyah, I'm just thinking about that because the parents really don't know what the children are seeing. You know, it's different when, you know, we had like one family TV or, you know, everybody answered the house phone. You don't know who's calling your kids. You don't know, like what the earplugs are in. You can't hear the music. You don't know what they're listening to. And you don't know what's on their computer. So parents are kind of shut out.
It's
and I was just
hard
going to
being
also,
a parent right now because even if they are doing these things, you want to give them freedom, but in the same breath, like it's a touch 22. If you are parenting too much and you get to ask them what they are listening to or how they're thinking or what's going on, now you're not giving them space. So the parents have a lot to deal with.
I was just
That's
going to
right.
add too, I think the other thing is that then it's the access. Again, when we were little, maybe the TV went off at 9 o'clock, but some people keep their phones on them. And so that's that constant exposure. The brain never really has that chance to rest. So that cortisol levels continue just to increase, causing more anxiety. And so I think that's the other thing too. It's not being able to kind of put these things away and then being able to let yourself rest, rejuvenate. But if you're constantly, if you're having any kind of cyberbullying where people are just constantly making attacks towards you as a youth, that can be very difficult. So I think also the access, and we are not putting those stopgaps to say, okay, let's put this away. When I was little, we used to have TV shows that, you knew at 9 o'clock were going to be more adult based. And that happens not anymore. We can see anything. Commercials now have information about birth control, all kinds of things that we used to not see as kids. So our kids are now constantly being bombarded by those things as well. And kids are sponges, especially little kids, right? So they take in everything. So I think that's just another thing that I would also add.
Well, I know studies have shown that there is a correlation between social media use and mental health issues among the youth. I'm just trying to figure out between, we're talking to you all, you are the professionals. How can parents and educators, help young people navigate social media in a way that it will minimize the negative impact that it has on their mental health?
First, I would say to be mindful, as Artesia and Ariyah have said, to be mindful what your kids are watching. Again, the music that we listen to. I know some of my little preschoolers, the beat of songs are just very catchy. But again, if you really listen to the words sometimes that go with songs, then you're like, oh my gosh, what are they saying? What are they hearing? And a lot of times little kids don't know what those things mean. So I think first is being aware of what's being sung. I remember my son was first playing video games and I forgot the game that what it's called, but it was very violent. And so
Is it
I was like,
Grand Theft
oh,
Auto?
well,
Is it
yep, thank you. Grand Theft
Grand
Auto,
Theft
thank
Auto?
you. And I was just like, oh, wait, my brother had got him that game. And he was like, Mom, this is about cars. And I went and watched, and I was like, oh, no, this is not about cars. And I was like, you can't play this game because it's just too violent. So a lot of times I think it requires that parents sit, they watch what their kids are watching on TV, things that they're reading, they read with them and make sure that that understanding is happening. So that's one of the first things I think would be very important. And as parents, sometimes we're busy and we don't always have time to be able to do that. But I think that's where it starts, is being able to kind of take that time, because we are our kids' first teachers. So that's what I would say.
And
Yeah.
can social media be addictive? I mean, really addictive. I just see a lot of kids have their phone all the time and you can't pry it out of their hands. And I just wonder about that. Is that like a real thing?
It is, yes, it is a real thing. And especially now with the whole increase with TikTok. I mean, you have people that are spending hours and hours a day. So it is an addiction right now that we're starting to see in the research that, yes, um, things in regards to social media can be addicting. And so as time goes on, I'm sure that we'll have some things that we'll start to even have in our diagnostic classification manual that will also address that. It's not there yet, but I'm sure it's going to be on its way.
And
So,
one
what do we do about that? I mean, as a parent, or guardian, a caretaker, what do you do about kids who just can't put, and that seems to be really common, even in classrooms, they've got their phones with them.
One of the things that I think is integral to managing how often our youth are engaging in social media is limit setting. I feel as though we as parents have to start early with the idea of streamlining not only what they're on, but how long they have the time to engage with that material or engage with their phones altogether. Something else to consider, leading by example. In the work that I've done with a lot of children, I hear conversations around how they feel like they're not heard because when they're trying to talk to their parents are on their phones. So how do we practice putting down our phones as well? I mean, I'm guilty of it, telling my daughter to do things while I'm scrolling on my phone, putting down the phones and saying, hey, we're going to go out in the yard and we're going to look at the grass, or we're going to read a book together, or we're going to do something that's not on our phones for a little bit. And the more that you build that into the structure, the routine of your household, the easier it becomes. I think some of the challenges around that is starting fresh and deciding at 13 you're not going to use your phone because I said so. And you might get a lot of pushback from that because that's not the routine. So building in that time out from technology for a little bit early, and then finding ways to build it into those schedules later on is going to be important.
Absolutely. So I want to jump back to, and we can get back to social media, but Ebony J and I were talking about this beforehand about signs of anxiety and depression. How do we know that someone like your kid isn't just tired, they're actually depressed, or they're not, just nervous? I mean, there's like real anxiety. How do we, what should we look for?
You want to start with that because you had a nice handout that you developed for that. You want to start with that?
Well, of course. So there are a lot of different aspects that come along with growing up, puberty, changes that are like the run-of-the-mill changes, and then some things that you would expect. And so when it comes to things like depression and anxiety, you're going to see shifts that kind of I don't want to say don't bounce back. So for example, I always think of kids changing their fashion. Like I've gone from wearing bright colors to now I'm wearing all black. So thinking through that, like what are some of the aspects around this change in how you're presenting yourself? Are there any other pieces that are changing for the worse at the same time? Are my grades dropping? Am I getting into fights? Am I no longer wanting to be social? And even then, what you'll find is that sometimes as kids mature, they choose different sets of friends. So as they're looking at these different sets of friends, are these friends that are constantly pushing them to engage in negative behaviors that are getting them in trouble, behaviors that are resulting in negative consequences? Or have they just shifted from, hanging out with the cheerleading team to hanging out with the volleyball team, or hanging out with the athletes to hanging out with the gamers? If they're switching different populations that they're associating with, that wouldn't be as much something to worry about. But if they're staying in their rooms all the time, if you're seeing changes in weight, if you're seeing changes in appetite, if you're seeing changes in mood that are not really kind of evening out, then you might want to start asking more questions. You might want to start having conversations with their primary care physician about whether or not this is something that I need to seek additional services for.
And I think also paying attention to developmentally where kids are. We know that going from grade school to middle school sometimes can be that shift where you're with different populations and age ranges now. And so, that sometimes can be a thing that, again, you might have had a child that was on the cusp of maybe having some of those depressive symptomatologies, maybe being a little bit more withdrawn, having maybe some sleepless nights because they're worried about that change. That might be a time. So paying attention to when we see these shifts. We also know that kids that go from middle school to high school, that can be another time where we also can see again if a kid was more anxious beforehand. Now going into a larger setting, going into high school where there's more demands, then that can also sometimes heighten that anxiety or that depression. So I think in addition to what Artesia was saying, also paying attention to those developmental changes that we see as kids go through these different periods with school.
Now we notice this and we're like trying to have the conversation. We're suspecting anxiety or depression. What are some questions that we should ask them? Because they don't always want to admit it, or they may not even know what depression is. They just know they're not feeling good. How do we kind of pull this out of them?
I would say first, just kind of making sure that you have that rapport with your child. How comfortable are you in just dialoguing with them in general? Because again, if a parent is always going and they're more in that mode of being a question, like, so what was your day? What did this happen? Da, da, da. But it's not like a natural flow. That child may not feel comfortable to be able to say, I can talk to you about anything because maybe you're always putting judgment. So how do we take that time to really communicate? And communication involves both talking and listening. So as that parent, have I set early on being able to talk and find out, not only like, how was your day, but tell me, what kind of things did you do? Oh, I see that you did this. Really showing that interest. And a lot of times that interest and that communication starts by reading. So if we read with our kids and we're able to kind of point out, make stories more interactive, to me, that's one of the ways that we can start to have those conversations. So if we see certain behaviors, I notice you've been in your room a lot. How are you feeling? What's going on? Sometimes I know when people stay in their room, they might be having certain feelings. I've heard sometimes people might feel like this. I'm wondering if that's how you might be feeling. So kind of making a non-judgmental kind of atmosphere and opening that door so that youth then feels that they, or that child feels that they then can communicate back to their parent. But if the parent is then going to really be judgmental, it might stop that right away. So that would be one of the things that I would suggest.
I
And
know when I was young, it used to be really, really hard for me to speak with my mom. Sometimes it can be hard for us to talk to our parents. But we came up with this thing where we had a safe word. So if I wanted to have this conversation with her about something and I needed her not to be my mom, I just needed a safe person to talk to, I would use that word. I think that that's a word. I think
I
that that
love
works
that,
for me.
Ebony J. That is
I
great.
do.
That's a great
Hmm.
idea.
Yes, I struggled with depression a lot when I was little, but my mom didn't really necessarily maybe know how to have those conversations with me or how to deal with it. But once we was able to come with that safe word, a lot of the things that I felt comfortable now to start sharing, and it did help a lot more. I know in the African American family, sometimes therapists can be frowned upon. In my family, it was no, you're not going to a therapist. You don't need a therapist. We're going to church. We're going to pray, right? But sometimes it don't, things get deeper and you actually need help. So what are those next steps are for a parent that's watching that may, feel that way? What are some things that we can suggest on why finding a therapist may be the next best step?
That's a great question. I love that.
Well, one of the things that I want to highlight that has been kind of cited in the research is this idea that there is a lot of fear around having that conversation with parents, not just fear of judgment, the stigma in general, but I don't want to disappoint you as you're my parent and you have enough on your plate. I don't want to add to your plate. I don't want to worry you. So some of the things that came up in the research that I've seen was like, well, offer to go with me. Say, hey, we're going to do this together. I think it might be a good idea to talk to someone and I'll go with you. I'll make the appointment with you. So it's like something we are doing together to address this issue. It's not a you issue or you problem. I'm here to support you in whatever growth you need. So how can we get this done?
Then I would add with that, how do we also help a parent to be able to see that just as we might go for some kind of treatment for like a headache or medication, it's the same thing. We're going to try to see what we can do to make you feel better. We know that you've been staying in your room. We know that we noticed your appetite has changed. And so we need to look and see what's going on with this. How can we best address this? When you have a headache, we might do a variety of different things. We might, lay down. We might take a cold compress, put it on our head. And eventually we might go to get some medication, which might be an aspirin or, whatever you take, Tylenol. And this is the same kind of thing. So we need to kind of remove that stigma if we can, to normalize that this is just another way that our body is acting, and we're going to try to see how we can change those behaviors. So that's the other thing that I think, helping parents to break that stigma is very important.
I like that. And I know sometimes it can still be hard. We got parents that still say they not going, but they may send their kid. But then we send our kids to school. There's normally therapists at school, but normally at this time, a lot of the schools don't have therapists or have had a shortage on it, or maybe they don't have enough time. It's too many kids to serve. What strategies could you give to the parents or some of the teachers that may be watching on how they can support their students in the classroom to notice, be able to spot anxiety or depression? Sometimes that little boy, he's not trying to disrespect you, I promise. He just you're stressing him out. You done gave him a anxiety attack right now, and this is how he's responding.
I think that is a perfect question. I cannot stress enough how important it is to build relationships with kids. All the research out there talks about the fact that if they have one adult, a connection with one adult, it dramatically changes the way that they move through life. So as teachers, you all see the students on a daily basis if they're coming to school like they should. And so you all may notice changes in kids, and you can have those same conversations saying, hey, I've noticed that, you don't seem to be in the kind of mood that I normally see you in. Usually you're laughing and joking, you're a little reserved today. Do you want to talk? Is there anything you want to talk about? Or just starting from there, hey, is there anything you want to talk about? I'm here if you ever want to talk. And that kid may not talk to you that day, but if you have the relationship built with them, then when they need to, they will.
And I wonder if teachers get training like that. And I really just don't know, because I'm thinking, sometimes like if a kid looks like you're saying, they're being quiet and they're not being themselves. So what about when they're, teachers are like, I'm about to throw this kid out the room, like they're really acting up. It could be because something's happening at home, like they're angry, they're upset, they're depressed, whatever they are, but they're being disruptive. And I wonder, is there training to help because that's got to be hard to help our teachers identify that. I guess identify that kind of behavior to know that something else is wrong.
I think it depends on the school
and the age range too, because like for younger kids, for preschool, a lot of the programs now are using something called conscious discipline by a woman named Becky Bailey. And so that is something that's going to help you to look at the whole child. And then how do we look at behavior implements that we can put in to try to make sure that we understand, is this child facing any adverse childhood events, which again might be things like, is there something going on in the household that maybe they have a parent that was incarcerated, or substance abuse or physical abuse is going on. And so they really do a nice job of trying to make sure that you really are understanding who you're working with. And as our teachers said, that helps to build that relationship, not only just with the kid, but with the parent. And so if you have a parent, at least for our Head Starts, if you have a parent that, again, is not very engaged, that could be giving you some indication too. So it's a relationship with the whole system, not just the child, but also the parent.
And I just want to add that journals, having the kids write in journals sometime, like the conversation may not happen out their mouth, but as the owner of our media center, we don't have any therapists here, but how we're able to connect with them is giving them a chance to have a journal entry or possibly doing an icebreaker. Most of the time, if the icebreaker don't go well, you can kind of tell what's happening with the student before you get into the actual instruction. So for my people that are watching, those are some things that I just wanted to add. And if you are watching and you have any questions as it relates to this conversation, understand this community town hall is for you. So we want to make sure that you add your comments below.
Let me ask you.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say classrooms also have family peer support workers that are there. And then also Cincinnati Children's is partnered with a legal system called Child Help. And that's another thing that maybe parents can be appraised of, as well as teachers. So if they have some kids or they need some special assistance, that might be another avenue that they could also go towards.
Okay. And Ebony was talking about seeing a therapist. So one question is, how does one even find a therapist? Like, how do you, you're thinking, oh, okay, you've looked at the symptoms. My kid went from, wearing like nice bright colors. Now they're all dressed in black. They're staying in their room. They're either gaining weight or, losing weight. Something's wrong. So, and, we try to have that conversation. They don't want to talk to me. So now what do I do? How do I find that therapist?
So I think when we find therapists, it's almost just like when you find doctors. Sometimes it's going to involve you kind of finding where's that best fit. And so it may require that you're going to find out from others that might have had a particular therapist. How do they find this therapist? Word of mouth sometimes is helpful. Going through your physician, your pediatrician, or your family medicine doctor to say who would they recommend for whatever this problem is. So again, if there's that relationship there. If not, then we also have places in Cincinnati like Best Point is a place that provides both therapy and assessment. We also have a list through Psy that has a list of Black providers in the surrounding Cincinnati area. And so if you go to PsychWorks, that's a place where, again, you can find a listing of various Black providers. But I would say when you're going for that therapist, you want to make sure, one, that relationship is there. They understand what the problem is. They're going to listen to hear what you're saying, that you see the difficulty is. Do they take that time to really try to understand without just saying, okay, this is what we're going to do? But there has to be a thorough intake so that you can get a good developmental history to know, did this problem just start now, or is this something that we've seen all along? It's just progressively gotten worse. So just as we would for just a regular physician, you want to take that time to really kind of fill out, is this the fit? Is what do they know in reference to the therapy? Are they using what we call evidence-based practices? And if they're not, and it doesn't seem to fit, you can go for a couple of sessions and then you go on to someone else. 988 is the suicide prevention line that, again, we use, but at the same time, that is also another place that could be a starting point too, to say, hey, I'm looking for a therapist. I live in this area. Do you have some suggestions?
Well, I know
Also,
finding a therapist can be extremely hard because sometimes your insurance may not cover that
Yes.
therapist that you did all this research to find, or they just may not cover helping your child. What recommendations do you have for those parents who are trying to seek assistance but keep getting shut doors because their insurance doesn't cover it?
And I think, again, that's a real problem. And that's where, again, going through, like I said, that 988, or trying to go through the list of referrals that Psy puts out could be a way of saying, do you take this insurance? Or even calling your insurance company to find out what is a list of providers in the area. And then from there, trying to see if you can find that best provider. Because again, sometimes our providers in certain areas still may not be the best people. And so again, sometimes you will have some providers that will do some pro bono work, but at the same time, I mean, I think that's a real hard thing sometimes. How we find qualified people that are going to still fit that area for your insurance. But that's the route I would go, is trying to, again, contact 988 to say, this is what my insurance is. Can you give me any suggestions on who might be the best provider to address this particular problem? And that child help would be another place.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, go ahead.
I was just saying child help could be another place that could also assist with that.
Child help. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So child help, there's you mentioned Best Point.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's a Black Psychologist Association, PsychWorks.
Correct.
So a lot of help. I was going to just say, I just want to piggyback on that 988, and we're going to jump into talking about suicide now too. But I want people to know that if you're having an emergency, a mental health emergency, 988 is the number to call. A lot of people go straight to 911, but 988 is a way to get mental health experts into your home to help you deal with that. They're connected with the emergency 911, and so if there are weapons involved, you will get an officer there with you. But if there aren't weapons involved, often they will send the mental health worker, because that's really the person you need to help you de-escalate the situation and to help the person having that crisis. So that's really important. Let's jump in and talk about suicide. We've heard that suicide rates among young people, the rates are going up. And can anyone give us some data? Like, is it like young Black men, young Black women, is it everybody? Like, what's going on?
There are, oh,
No, I'm
did you
saying,
want
go ahead
to?
and start. Yeah, go ahead. This is your area.
I was going to say that there definitely has been some increases over the past year. I would say maybe 10 years. The rates for Black children completing suicide has surpassed that of white children by the percentages. And so it's one of those things where we start to ask questions about why this is happening, like what has changed, what is different. And so a part of some of the work that I've done in looking into some of those trends looks at different things like bullying in the school system and the idea that there maybe isn't as much a response as we would hope for some of the things that are happening in the schools, but also those coping strategies, also access to resources, and when I say resources, the lack of access to resources or the lack of participation in resources. And that can come from a number of things. It's not always just parents not necessarily understanding or validating that that concern is a legitimate concern, but sometimes it's the parents going to the physicians and saying, hey, this is something that my kid is worried about, and physicians saying, oh, well, they'll grow out of it. That's just a part of growing up. So it becomes systemic in one sense when we are trying to find the supports that are going to best support our children. And there's also this mindset that Black people don't do that. So it's so many things that we're fighting against when we're trying to help people understand that it is something that happens. It is something that needs to be taken seriously every time a kid mentions it. And even like the language around how we talk about suicide is something important um, to think about. Like when kids joke about it, correct them and say, no, that's not something we joke about. But even when we're having conversations around it, a lot of people will say, oh, well, that person committed suicide. And I challenge or I push people to change that language. And one of the things that we use a lot is died by suicide, because there's such a negative connotation to committed. You think being committed to an institution or someone committed a crime, when the circumstances surrounding suicide becomes that overwhelming, it's very similar to a heart attack. You don't say someone committed a heart attack. Um, they died by a heart attack. So when we're thinking about how we look at mental health in general, and the pieces that play into that, it's important for us to be addressing the underlying symptoms, the stigmas, the systemic issues in the same ways that we do our medical health.
I love that, that we have to start looking at the language we're using, because there certainly is a stigma and it keeps people from talking. And I was saying this earlier that often when someone dies by suicide, and you'll hear the parents or the loved ones or the friends say, they seem so happy. I never knew anything was wrong. Like, how do we not know that something's wrong? What did we miss? What should we be looking for? And let's start with parents. What do we look for in our kids?
I would go back to what our teacher said earlier in reference to some of those changes in mood. Again, I think one of the things that might be the hardest is if you have a adolescent or a youth that's in college, because the parents aren't there to see how they're interacting. So then maybe it's this thing, if this person already had a history of any kind of depression or anxiety, to make sure that you're having frequent contact with them, or again, the roommates, if they have roommates, because sometimes you're not going to be able to see it. But if you are still living in that same environment with the person, then again, just trying to be mindful of, are we seeing that they're seeming more withdrawn? Are they doing things like giving away things, things that might have brought them joy? And now all of a sudden it's like, hey, do you want this? Do you want that? Because sometimes that can be an indication that possibly, and we're looking at a cluster of things. It's not always maybe just one behavior. It might be a cluster of things. You see that their eating behaviors are changed. Maybe they're doing more eating versus less eating. And so there's some weight changes, or maybe again, there's more of that withdrawal. Things that they used to like to do with the family, they don't want to do now. They just want to kind of be to themselves. So I think just being mindful of what those various behavioral changes are. And again, maybe it's academic. Sometimes, as I said, when you have a person that transitions from like elementary to middle school, or middle school to a high school, that can be traumatic for some kids. And academically, they may not feel on par, especially if they're taking harder subjects now, like, languages and things of that nature, or, various math subjects. So again, just being mindful of, are you seeing grade changes? Maybe they really wanted to be in drill team or cheerleading and they didn't get on, or they wanted to be in the football team and they got, cut down by the coach or something. All those things can impact kids, and as a result, make them feel worthless and then hopeless. And then with the bullying that we talked about earlier, all those can compact things, and that might be the things that we need to look at as a parent to see, are we noticing those changes?
Yeah, and I think another thing to add as well is that once again, it kind of comes back to having those conversations with your children. And when you notice things, finding a way to talk about it in a very non-judgmental, non-reactive way. Because I mean, it can be a little heart-wrenching to talk to your kids about things like this, especially if they do confirm that they are feeling these ways. So I think that it definitely comes back to talking to them about how they're feeling and exploring that with them and figuring out where to go from there, which once we talked about looking for therapists, and if it really does come down to a crisis situation, calling 988 and getting those resources as well.
Yeah, talking to teenagers can be tough. I mean, I remember my kids are in their 20s now, but I just remember, the high school years, things change. Like, what happened in school today? Nothing. How are you doing? Fine. I mean, it's like, what? Where's the, you're sitting around the dinner table, it's pulling teeth. I mean, what happened? And so they kind of, at some point they kind of cut off, and I think they're trying to distance themselves so they can be, grown up, but it gets tough. I mean, they don't just open up necessarily. I mean, you got to keep pushing.
Well,
And
what was really surprising to me, Jan, when I looked at the statistics for it, our age range where we're seeing the most suicide is ages 8 through 12. And so I was expecting it to be more with the teenagers because they're dealing with the most. But with suicide being the fifth leading cause of death, and our babies being the ones that are the victims, I'm just trying to figure out, like, can we really say all of this is social media? Like, what was the change? Because I remember being 8
8
and
to
12 too.
12. I mean, oh my goodness, they're so little. Like, what is that? Ebony's right. You hear that a lot.
I think right now, at least from my experience with our preschoolers, if you have a preschooler that is being expelled from preschool before they even get to kindergarten, think about what that does to a little one's self-esteem, their self-worth. Oh, I wasn't good enough. I got kicked out. And so again, if that doesn't get fixed, that can start to be the cause of lots of problems, a lot of pent up aggression, anger, because again, they feel demoralized. So I think for some kids that we see with those younger ages, sometimes that plays a good factor. We have a lot of substance use that's being used in our adults now, and as a result, that substances now carries over to our kids, where we have various disorders like fetal alcohol syndrome, or alcohol neurological related disorders. So again, that also can then play a part too in reference to those behaviors that we see the kids displaying. They can look like they're having ADHD, or they can look like they're having various thinking, problem solving, cognitive deficits. And as a result, they don't know what to do with school, and school doesn't know what to do with them. And so again, that could possibly be another reason for why we're seeing younger ages, because again, they're in the classroom and no one's paying attention to them, so they act out, they get kicked out of there. It's the same pattern that happened to them when they're preschoolers is happening to them now when they're in elementary school.
And
If we don't
something
start
else to
early, it doesn't
consider.
help. Mhm.
Something else to consider is when we're thinking about um, the reasoning skills, the ability to reason through information doesn't develop for a lot of people until they're in their 20s. And so in those younger ages, you're really acting and reacting based on emotions. And when you're that age, there's a lot of impulsivity there. In addition to that, there's a bit of a lack of insight. So this idea of death may not be concrete enough for students that young to really understand what the actions they're taking will result in. And taking it a step further, they are impulsive in their actions. And so when we're thinking about how we're keeping our babies safe, what's in the environment that they can use to cause that harm? How can we be proactive about those conversations, but also the environment that they're in to make sure that there's little access to means that can hurt themselves? And that's not just when we're thinking about death, but also just generally speaking, the impulsivity and what kids are getting into. If it's not in the environment, it makes it one step further that they would have to take. And what we want to do is stack stack the load against that action, get as much in place to delay, get in the way, and, you know, circumvent that as possible.
Yeah,
I
I was
love
gonna say,
that
they
you
probably don't
said
even think
that
death is permanent. I mean, yeah, I'm sorry. I mean, they're, you know, it's like you play video games, you shoot up, kill, whatever, and you turn on the game the next day, there's that character right back. I mean, they're, you know, at 8 to 12 years old, it just seems like this is something I'm doing for now, but they're not thinking this is like really permanent. I mean, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, you're fine. That's what I was going to add, because I know for a moment that suicide challenge was a thing going through social media, and the kids were doing the suicide challenge. So, of course,
Oh
when I
my
heard it,
God,
I
what?
said what you
That's
said. What, the
crazy.
suicide challenge? Why would they do that? Because it's going to lead to death. But it just, Artesia just broke that down. You know, they don't understand the value of life, the seriousness of it. You know, what can possibly happen, understanding the consequences. So yeah, I was just wanting to add the same thing.
Brain does not develop fully in an adolescent until they're 25 years of age. So again, that impulsivity that she spoke of, the insight, they don't have that. And when they actually then turn teens, they really go back to that egocentric, all about me kind of things. They don't think about consequences. So all those kind of things come back and play. But I think also with what our teacher said for impulsivity, how do we also help to help them to get that energy out in other means versus coming and just playing a game? You know, when they're young, do we also put them in things, different kinds of sports or different kinds of activities, gymnastics, those kinds of things? And if you can't afford that, there are various programs within the city that you can have kids go to that they can, again, get some of that energy out. So that helps with that impulsivity. So again, that would be the other thing that I would say is also important.
Wow, that's, you know, so that I mean, the whole suicide thing for me is like really scary. And
Yeah.
you know, and when you start talking about how young kids can be, let me just say Orienta Eisen, when we were talking about you know, how do you find a therapist, she mentioned there's another source, psychologytoday.com. Uh, and I guess what Orienta is saying is that that's a way to find therapists as well.
Yeah.
So I just want to thank her for that. So she just posted that here. So what advice do you have for parents when and we can talk about teachers too, but let's just focus on parents for a minute, when they really don't know what's wrong and their child just is not talking to them, because I can see that happening a lot. And you know, a lot of parents they're out there working, trying to make a living also. That's another thing. You know, your kid says, yeah, I'm fine, and you're like, okay. You know, so I mean, like how do you break through that? What do we do? What are some takeaways here that we can tell parents to do?
I think one of the first takeaways will be, again, just trying to understand the behavior, that looking at the intensity of what are you seeing. Are they really, you know, withdrawn? They're always saying nothing's wrong, but then you're thinking like this, they don't really just seem the same anymore. They seem more withdrawn. They're not communicating like they used to. So I think being able to look at the intensity, being able to look at the frequency, how often are they seeing this? Is it just kind of like a, you know, one day they're fine, the next day they're okay? Or is this a pattern where we continue to see? What's the duration? How long are these problematic behaviors that you're seeing? Maybe the withdrawal, change in their eating, those kinds of things. How long are those happening? And then how different is it from where they should be developmentally? So we know that adolescents are going to try to start to assert their autonomy, their individuality. So they want to sometimes move away and not be with parents. And so is this really a developmental thing, or is it no? We're seeing all these other factors, these other patterns that are going along to see the change. So that's one of the first things that I would say is important for a parent to be able to recognize, so that they can see then, again, if you have that relationship, how do we then take it outside of like, let's go, you know, let's go shoot some hoops, or, you know, let's get our nails done. And while they're getting nails done, that could be the opportunity where you then start to open the door to have conversations. So a lot of times it's not going to just be sitting in the room with them, but doing what's an interest that that person might have had, and seeing if that can be the way that you can get into then that dialogue with them.
And I do want to add, you know, I feel like working with adolescents can be tough, because it's like, a mine that you're trying to find the or not a mine, a safe that you're trying to find the passcode for in order to try to get them to open up. What some of the research says though is that they really do value that time spent with parents. So many of them express, I wish we could just talk. And to be very specific, I wish I would be heard. So sometimes it could just be every day, this is your time. I'm just going to sit here. And when you're ready to talk, I'm here. And eventually they're going to bring something to you. And when they do, how you respond will really impact whether or not they choose to do that again in the future. So if you jump in and, oh, I have advice, this is exactly what you need to do. And that's not what your child was, if they just needed to vent, then they may not be as open to having that communication in the future. So you really have to assess, like, what do you need from this interaction? Because I want to make sure I support you. The other thing is, I feel like in our community, we are not as expressive verbally about some things, but tell the kids you love them, tell them you care, tell them their long-term development is important to you. Like, I'm here for you. And ensuring that what you're doing matches your words.
I think women are probably, and okay, this is kind of a sexist thing to say, but I'm just gonna throw it out there. I think women are really good at listening. It seems to me that men often say, I mean, like women trying to talk to men, men will say, I can fix that. Here's the answer. And sometimes you want to say, I don't want an answer. I just want you to listen. And so I think women are really good at that. Just, we can listen. We don't have to try to fix it.
Well, I do want to add to that, and I'm glad you all both said that, especially Artesia, you're hitting the nail on on the money. When I'm working with a lot of these young Black boys, they tell me that their moms that they're not heard. So I think that sometimes, we do think moms, we are listening, but really we're not. We're trying to give them our opinions. We're trying to force our beliefs on them. We're judging them off of things that they say. But they don't want that from us. They really do want you to listen. I cannot express how many young men have expressed to me when I would try to give them, tidbits to go home with and try to start conversations with their parents. It's the big thing, like you said, they're not heard. The parent hear them say one or two sentences and then they're ready to react, are ready to give their 2 cents versus actually hearing what they're saying. And I think parents, the school year is almost here. Let's just try a new way, a new strategy, a new approach with our babies. Like she said, give them that moment when they get in the car. How was school? If you keep doing it every day, one day they may actually say it. But if they do say that they were getting bullied or something happened, maybe don't jump off the deep end too hard, because sometimes that makes them step away and now they don't want to share because they like, mom's gonna go crazy. Again, we know that it can be a catch-22 with parents because it's a hard predicament to be in, but you have to get some trust there and really, really make it comfortable for the babies to be able to talk to you about what they want. No matter how uncomfortable you may be, put your poker face on and then literally just hear them out. If we literally start that strategy with these babies, you will learn a lot more about them and hear a lot about what they're trying to say and what they're going through. But we got to take the mommy hat off. We got to take the daddy hat off and
Don't give
actually
advice,
be
right?
present.
Right, just be present. One thing that I think people have told me this really helps, and something I've tried with my kids is, when you feel like judging, don't judge, just repeat back to them what it is they're saying.
Yes.
So like, yeah, like, okay, so I hear you saying that you're feeling like this, and then they start feeling, oh yeah, that's right, that's what I'm trying to explain to you. That's what it feels like. And so instead of you saying, I'm gonna fix it, you just kind of, try to really try to say what it is they're saying to you. And then it's easier to feel heard. And then you start to actually understand them better too. You all know we have done all this talking and I'm just loving it because you all are so full of good information, but we're nearing the end. And so, Ebony J and I talked about giving everybody a chance to say, here's a takeaway. So something that you want to make sure that people hear and understand. And we've got a little bit of time for that, so you don't have to rush through it. But if we could go with all three of you with, what do you want to make sure people, what's the message? What do you want to make sure people know from this conversation? So,
think-
Dr. Warfield, do you want to start?
I would say from this conversation, I hope people will take away being responsive versus reactive. And if I could for a minute, if you were just to put your fingers together to make like a little circle like this, okay, and then go ahead and look at me. And I want you to put that on your chin. Okay, so what did you do? You look and see where your finger is, Miss Ebony. What did I say?
I did that at first too.
Your finger's on your, okay.
But I'm
so
looking at you.
Yeah, and that was purposely to do that. But we need to learn how
That
to
was a good
slow
one.
down, stop and think, right? And so being responsive versus reactive. If we learn a little bit as parents, as teachers, to be responsive, taking that time to build the relationship, taking that time to think about what it is that we're here and listen to communicate. As I said, whilst talking and listening, it's a two-way process. But we got to slow down. I think sometimes we're too fast to move. And again, based on, as a teacher, you might be in that mode of, oh, I have to be able to fix it. As a parent, I have to be in that mode to fix it. But as we said, just taking that time to slow down, stop and think, respond before reacting. That's the
So with
takeaway.
Dr. Warfield, that also was a good example of people do what you do, not what you say.
And
I
that's a
mean,
good
you
point
said
as well.
put your hand on your chin and you did this. So, we're doing that, right? Because you said chin, but you're doing this. So we're doing this. So yeah,
Exactly.
modeling. And I think you all talked about that earlier too, about modeling that behavior. Don't tell your kids to put down the phone while you're up here talking on the phone, right? So yeah, we've got to do that. That's great. Okay. Ariyah, you want to be next?
Yeah, I'll go next. I think that another takeaway is to be present with your child. I think that we really spent a lot of time talking about just how, once again, we get caught up in the things going on. Life is stressful. Life, doesn't wait for anybody, unfortunately. But I think it's important that we spend that time with our children, prioritizing the things that they're interested in and talking to them and having those open conversations. And I really do think that, Dr. Warfield is onto something for sure about, not being reactive and listening to your children and not being the first to fix something, giving them that autonomy. I think another thing as well for a takeaway is to be cognizant of what's going on around your children, be involved in school, talking to their teachers, figuring out what's going on in their world, because they spend a lot of time at school throughout the week. That's where people see them the most while you're working or doing whatever you're doing. So I think having that avenue of communication with the teacher to figure out what's going on at school, in addition to what you see at home, is a really important thing. And being cognizant of what society is doing around them. We talked about trends on TikTok and what kids are interested in and what they're Googling, what they're, just wanting answers to. And so I think that taking that time to understand what they're interested in and what, society is telling them around them, that can bridge to some really good conversations as well and gives opportunity to build those relationships to help them. So I think those would be the takeaways from my point of
Yeah,
view.
I really, like what you said about being aware of what's going on. And when you guys told me about the suicide challenge, I never even heard of that. And that scares me to death. I'm like, what? So, we have to know what's going on. We have to break through that.
You're on Twitter, Jan. Go ahead and hit the hashtag suicide challenge. You're going to see all the videos. It's crazy.
I don't think I can even watch it. That's so crazy. Just, our kids are so important to us, and I can't imagine somebody encouraging them to commit suicide or to die by suicide. Okay, I'm gonna change that language. Okay, Artesia, go ahead.
I'm going to try to summarize it briefly in about 3 points. Number one, like we talked about before, kids are sponges and they learn a lot from everything. So, like Ariyah was saying, monitoring what they're doing is going to be important, but also what are you doing? What are you modeling for them? And it can't just be work-life balance. How do we model self-care? And I know time is something that we don't have a ton of. So I'm going to go do this. I'm going to take a break from technology and I want you to sit here and do it with me. We're going to do self-care together. I'm going to show you, look, and again, being appropriate about what is age appropriate for your child. But listen, I'm dealing with this dilemma. And so I just want you to hear me talk through how I'm managing my emotions with it. I'm going to hear you listen to me talk through how, hey, I went to the gym today because I had to burn off some steam. I had this conversation with this coworker that I just was not feeling. And as you are having these interactions with your child, you're teaching them problem solving skills that they can then go back and use. So, keeping in mind, caring for yourself and watching how you are interacting with your environment will help them learn. And then the last one is we are very much community driven. So don't forget about your resources, your mentors, your coaches. Everybody has a hand in keeping our kids safe, keeping our kids well. And it starts with dispelling a lot of those stigmas. Everyone should be talking about how it's okay to be nervous sometimes. Here's what I do to get through it. And as we are having these conversations, then kids are being able to see themselves in everybody and feel better about, okay, I'm gonna go talk to this person because I know I can trust that they'll be honest with me about how to deal with this situation. So those are my takeaways.
Those are great. Yeah, that's wonderful. Ebony J, before we close out, you've got, I mean, you work with so many young people and you just do a great job. I mean, she's got a studio full of folks over there at Ebony J Media and always out in the community. So I really love that.
Thank you. My biggest takeaway was just knowing the signs. Be aware of the shift. They happening, but as parents, like she said, I know we're busy, but open our eyes and see.
Right, absolutely. And just know, as all of you have said, there are resources out there. Center for Closing the Health Gap will have them all listed for you. So we have from what Orienta put there in the chat to what all of you all have offered us, the Black Psychologist, the Psy.M, let's see, I'm missing my notes here. What did you all say?
Site works,
Yes,
child health.
Psych Works. I think that's Dr. Hatch. Is that Dr. Rich Hatch? Because we've had him on
Richie
before.
Hall.
Richie
Dr.
Hall.
Hall's-
Dr.
Richie
Richie
Hall,
Hall.
Dr.
Hall,
Richie.
sorry, I didn't mean Hatcher. Richie Hall. He's great. He was and still could be president of the Black Psychologist,
Yes.
Dr. Richie Hall. You said Best Point,
That's
AB
point.
Psych.
We sent you actually a list too. So we sent you a list of resources. So I don't know if that's something you wanted to post, but we sent you a list of resources as well as some articles, links for cyberbullying, bullying, suicide. So we sent that information to
great.
you as well.
So the Center for Closing the Health Gap has all of that. So make sure everybody uses that and remember calling 988 to get information. Also, in case of a mental health emergency, you want to call 988. So all of you are just fantastic. We're going to have you back again. Everybody's so great. And I just want to give a shout out to Renee Mahaffey Harris and the Center for Closing the Health Gap for bringing this wonderful information. This is probably town hall, maybe close to 60 by now, at least 55. I know it's over 50. They've done so many town halls starting during the COVID era and continuing with just great information. And so this will be shared. We appreciate your time, your expertise, really shedding a lot of light on a difficult subject because we have to really protect our youth and their mental health and know that their mental health is just as important as their physical health. So thank you, all of you. Everybody have a good evening and we'll be back in touch soon.
All right.
Thank you for having us.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.